Cut cloud costs with Azure, 7 proven startup tactics. Cut cloud costs with Azure, 7 proven startup tactics. That's what we're tackling today. If you've been wondering about how to cut cloud costs with Microsoft Azure for startups, stick around. Now, let's talk about why Azure cloud bills catch startups off guard. Azure's pricing model is not designed for simplicity. Compute, storage, networking, licensing, support plans, and data egress are all billed separately. A developer spinning up a VM for testing and forgetting to shut it down can add $200 to that month's invoice without anyone noticing until the bill arrives. A few common culprits. Azure provides the tools to fix all of these. The problem is that most teams do not open cost management until the bill already hurts. Now, moving on to Tactic 1, claim Azure startup credits before you write a single line of infrastructure. If your startup qualifies, claiming credits should come before any infrastructure decisions. Microsoft offers up to $150,000 in Azure credits through the Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub, which is free to join. Eligibility is based on your startup stage, not revenue. Early-stage companies without external funding can still qualify for the lower credit tiers. For startups connected to accelerators, VCs, or Microsoft partners, additional credits are often available through those relationships. Some founders receive $25,000 in credits just through qualifying accelerator cohorts and never claim them because they did not know the program existed. How to claim Azure startup credits. Next up, moving on to Tactic 2, right-size your Azure virtual machines. Right-sizing is the single highest ROI action you can take to cut cloud costs with Microsoft Azure for startups. Most teams over-provision VMs at launch because load is uncertain, then never revisit sizing once actual usage data is available. Azure Advisor analyzes your VM utilization over a 7 to 30-day window and flags resources running below 5% average CPU. It gives direct resize recommendations with estimated monthly savings next to each one. The Azure Advisor Cost Recommendations page documents exactly how the analysis works and how to act on it. What right-sizing looks like in practice. Let's talk about now. Tactic 3, use Azure reserved instances to save up to 72%. Pay-as-you-go pricing is convenient but expensive for stable workloads. For production web servers, databases, API gateways, and anything that runs consistently, Azure reserved instances cut that cost substantially. A 1-year commitment typically saves 30 to 40% versus on-demand pricing. A 3-year commitment reaches 60 to 72% depending on the VM series and region. You can pay upfront for the maximum discount, or choose monthly payments with a slightly smaller discount and no large initial outlay. A concrete example, a standard _D4S_V3 in East US costs approximately $0.192 per hour on pay-as-you-go. A 1-year reserved instance brings that to about $0.128 per hour. Over 12 months for a single always-on VM, that is roughly $560 in savings before anything else changes. Next up, Tactic 4, use Azure Cost Management tools to find and kill waste. Azure Cost Management Plus billing is included with every Azure subscription at no charge. Most startups open it once when something looks wrong, then close it and forget it. Teams that review it weekly consistently find $200 to $400 in reclaimable spend each month. The Azure Cost Management documentation covers the full feature set. For startups, the most useful capabilities are: for a detailed budget configuration walkthrough for early-stage teams, Azure Cost Management for Startups, stay under $500 per MO has step-by-step instructions. Let's talk about now, Tactic 5. Go serverless for bursty or infrequent workloads. Azure Functions and Azure Container Apps charge per execution rather than per hour of uptime. For workloads that run intermittently, serverless can cut cloud costs with Azure by 80 to 90% versus a dedicated VM. A concrete comparison, an API endpoint processing 50,000 requests per month on a dedicated B2MS VM costs roughly $70 per month. The same workload on an Azure Functions consumption plan costs approximately 40 cents per month at standard pricing. The gap is not always that extreme, but for genuinely event-driven work, serverless wins on cost consistently. The honest limitation is cold start latency. Azure functions on the consumption plan can take 1 to 3 seconds to respond after a period of inactivity. For user-facing APIs where that response time is unacceptable, a premium plan or container apps with minimum replicas set to 1 is a better fit, though the cost advantage narrows considerably. Let's talk about now. Tactic 6, cut Azure storage costs by matching data to the right tier. Azure Blob Storage has 4 access tiers: Hot, Cool, Cold, and Archive. Most startups store everything in Hot by default because that is the default setting. Hot tier costs roughly $0.018 per gigabyte per month in East US. Archive tier costs $0.00099 per gigabyte. That is an 18x price gap, and nearly every startup is leaving money on the table here. A startup storing 10 terabytes of old logs, compliance records, and historical exports in Hot tier pays roughly $184 per month on storage alone. Moving that data to Archive drops the cost to about $10 per month. Watch out for retrieval fees on Archive and Cold tiers. Archive charges approximately $0.022 per gigabyte to rehydrate data. If you access the data more than once or twice a year, Cold tier is usually a better balance between storage cost and retrieval flexibility. Let's talk about next up. Tactic 7, prevent surprise Azure bills with budget alerts and spending controls. A large portion of startup Azure overspend happens because no guardrails exist. Azure does not stop your resources when you hit a budget threshold. It sends an alert and keeps billing. Setting controls up front is the only reliable protection. How to set up budget alerts in Azure. Before deploying any new service, model the cost in the Azure pricing calculator. Build estimates at expected load, at peak load, and at worst-case misconfiguration. The 5 minutes it takes prevents the 3-hour conversation about an unexpected bill at month end. Next up, now, Azure versus AWS, which actually costs less for startups in 2026. The honest answer is that it depends on your workload, but Azure has measurable advantages for specific startup profiles. Azure tends to cost less when AWS tends to cost less when your team has deep AWS expertise and switching cost is real, or when your architecture relies on AWS native services with no direct Azure equivalent. Let's talk about conclusion. Knowing how to cut cloud costs with Microsoft Azure for startups is not a one-time project. It is an ongoing practice. Review your cost management dashboard weekly, act on advisor recommendations promptly, and revisit your reserved instance coverage each quarter as your workload evolves. The 7 tactics in this guide work together. Teams that apply all 7 consistently see 35 to 55% reductions in monthly Azure spend without any degradation in performance or reliability. Start with the 2 or 3 tactics that match your current spending patterns. If you are unsure where your biggest waste is hiding, open Azure Advisor today and check the Cost tab. The savings are usually already identified, sitting there, waiting for someone to act on them.